my director told us that our goal was to create every phone call and every client visit to turn that into a revenue generating visit. Well, if a woman comes in and she's pregnant, the only way we can do that is by selling her an abortion
Right.
because we don't do prenatal care. Planned Parenthood does not provide prenatal care at any of their clinics across the country. They don't do, adoption services. They don't make money off of that. So the only way we could make money was to sell a woman an abortion. And we were given the directive to sell abortion.
Glad to have this next guest with us. Actually, was a recommendation by my wife who read this lady's book, Unplanned. You can find her at abbyjohnson.org, not .com, .org, get it right. Abby Johnson, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very glad to have you on the show. And like I said, okay, so full disclosure, I never lie to people and be like, I read your book. I've read excerpts, but my wife was enthralled. And
Okay.
she was the one who said, you have to have her on. So, we've had some pro-life people on the show before. And my wife knows all of them. She reads almost anything she can get her hands on. But there was something here that really touched her. Have you noticed a reaction from many people who've read your book that that sort of differentiates it, I guess, from a lot of the other sort of pro-life sites or books out there?
Yeah, I think one of the things is that because I used to be a pro-choice person, and then writing a book kind of about being that person and being in the pro-choice movement. Um, my purpose was not to vilify them, but just to help people have an understanding of where they're coming from. Not saying that it's right.
Right.
Abortion is absolutely wrong, but that, we're not at war with these people that are working in the clinics or these people who are pro-choice. We're at war with the ideology, but not the people themselves. And so I think that was something that was new to the pro-life movement,
Mm-hmm.
honestly, because they had for so long wanted to make enemies of the people who do support abortion.
Right. I think you're right. And I think, we've talked about this. I think there's a time for that. I think there's a time to throw caution to the wind and offend people, and it's okay because you're
Sure.
offending the right people. And I think there are people who are not beyond reaching, and you need to understand the difference. And that's really sort of the skill, I guess, of expressing political ideology, is knowing how to walk that line in a way that's appropriate for your audience. So you worked at now it was Planned Parenthood, right? It wasn't just any abortion clinic.
That's right. Right. It was Planned Parenthood Clinic. I was the director there. We were an abortion facility. I was there for 8 years.
Now, you say that you were an abortion facility. Does that mean that that was your designated purpose at this Planned Parenthood facility? Because we're told that, it's a very small percentage of what Planned Parenthood actually does.
Yeah. Um,
You
it,
don't agree, I can tell.
it was, we were there to, it's kind of a tricky question because we were there as a family planning clinic
Mm-hmm.
who provided abortions.
Ah,
Okay. But the whole premise behind being a family planning clinic is to get women on a contraceptive method that will eventually fail them. We know that 54% of women having abortions were using contraception at the time they got pregnant. So the whole purpose is get them on a contraceptive method that will fail them so that we can make them abortion patients. So we're willing to be lost leaders, if you will, in the contraceptive movement because we will eventually sell them our big ticket item, which is abortion.
now you say that. I want to be clear because I'm not necessarily against all contraception. I don't know where you end up. Now, you say you were
Yeah.
actually encouraged to give them the less effective contraceptive available, or do you just mean contraception in general?
Well, we want to give them a contraceptive method that has a higher risk of failure,
Really?
right? And what's going to have a higher risk of failure? Those that have higher human error failure rates, right? So, birth control pill, I'm 35 years old. I can't remember to take a pill at the same time every day, right? A 14-year-old sure as heck is not going to remember to take a pill at the same time every day so that it's 99% effective, right? So put her on a pill that she's probably not going to take at the same time every day, that she's not going to know how to properly take. Eventually, she will get pregnant, and then she will be one of our clients.
That makes sense. Now, a quick question, because you're going to have critics here. Was that actually outlined to you as an employee at Planned Parenthood, or was it just sort of an unwritten, well, we know that this contraception will eventually fail them, or did they say, listen, our goal is to get them on the big hook for abortion.
Yeah, well, we had an abortion quota that I've actually exposed because I have the document that showed where the quota was on our budget sheet.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a quota for abortion. So we were to sell abortion to women when they came in. Over 90% of pregnant women who enter Planned Parenthood will have an abortion. So
Wait, what was that number?
over 90%.
Over 90% of women who walk in through the doors will have an abortion.
Pregnant women
Pregnant women.
who
Okay.
walk, yeah. So the idea that they're there to offer options or referrals for other services is just a farce, because my director told us that our goal was to create every phone call and every client visit to turn that into a revenue generating visit. Well, if a woman comes in and she's pregnant, the only way we can do that is by selling her an abortion,
Right.
because we don't do prenatal care. Planned Parenthood does not provide prenatal care at any of their clinics across the country. They don't do, adoption services. They don't make money off of that. So the only way we could make money was to sell a woman an abortion. And we were given the directive to sell abortion.
So it's the Glengarry Glen Ross of dead babies. ABC always be closing. That was
That's
given
right.
from the top down. Not to
Yes.
make abortion jokes, but we have to actually. Otherwise, I get horribly uncomfortable with serious topics.
Yeah, yeah.
You knew what you were getting into.
I
when you
got
came
it.
into this
Yeah, I
program.
follow you. Yeah.
No, that's
Uh-huh.
exactly it. And I talked about that with Planned Parenthood, their website. The highest quality health services at the lowest possible prices. This was the first video I ever did that went, semi-viral. I think at the time it maybe got 30,000 plays. And we did Crazy Pete's Abortion Barn. And it was Planned Parenthood as a dirty used car salesman. Because I thought back then, not knowing what you're saying now, that it just seemed like scummy, greasy, dirty car salesman. And you're telling me that behind the scenes, that was the goal. Abortion quotas. And it sounds terrible. And people are like, well, how are you making light? Using humor is not making light of a situation. It's shining a light on the situation. I mean, how else do you, abortion quotas? It's so laughable. It's horrifying.
Right.
I can't believe that they actually gave that to you as a directive. Okay, well, we'll come back here from this break because I want to talk about your turning point. And that's what my wife and I talked about for a long time. Louder with Crowder, abbyjohnson.org. Stay tuned. Back with Abby Johnson, abbyjohnson.com, of the book Unplanned. Listen, my wife loves this book. And she talked about something, Abby, to get a little serious here. She talks about your turning point. I don't want to give anything away for the listener, but you pinpointed it to a very specific moment, which I thought was pretty impactful. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. So after working there for 8 years, I was the director, so I wasn't, in the room very often for medical procedures or anything like that. We had a visiting physician come in from out of town who was performing abortions at my facility. Abortion, Planned Parenthood's protocol and the National Abortion Federation, their protocol for abortion is that it be done in a blind manner. So they have a suction tube that's hooked up to the machine, and
Right.
they just blindly poke around inside the woman's uterus until they think they have enough tissue in a jar. So that was the way that I knew abortion to be performed day in and day out. But this doctor actually used an ultrasound at his own practice during the abortion so that he could see what was taking place inside the woman's womb, because shockingly enough, it is safer if a doctor can see what he's doing while he's performing surgery, right? So, but that was
I
something.
don't know that I agree with the premise, but continue.
So that was something I never really thought about before. So he said that, if time permitted, that he would have me come in so I could assist. My job during the abortion was to hold the ultrasound probe on the woman's abdomen so that he could see what was going on during the abortion. And I watched a 13-week-old baby fight and struggle for his life during that abortion procedure. And I knew then that I had been lied to. I knew that because of that, I had in turn lied to thousands of women who had come through my facility. I estimate that I helped to provide about 20,000 abortions during my time with Planned Parenthood. So I knew I had to get out. I knew I had to leave. And that was when I made the decision to quit.
How soon did that occur after that moment with the ultrasound?
I left about a week
Really?
later.
Okay. So it was. Sometimes people will go back and they go, "Oh, I had my sort of come to Jesus moment," and you realize, well, it didn't really happen. So this was literally within the week you were gone.
Yeah, and I didn't want to leave my job because I made a ton of money at
Oh,
Planned
sure.
Parenthood, and all of my friends were there, so I didn't want to leave. I was trying really hard to make it okay in my mind, what I had seen.
Sure.
But after a week, I was just like, I can't do it. I can't make this right in my mind.
Are you still friends with any of them?
No, 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 they testified against me in court, actually, so we don't really talk anymore.
Yeah, that can kind of put a damper on the whole friendship.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
how did they testify against you? What was it
So,
they
well, 3 weeks after I left Planned Parenthood, they took me to court and they were concerned that I was going to share proprietary information about the organization, which that was a reasonable concern for them
I
since that
can
is
yeah,
what I
let's
do.
be honest
Yeah,
here.
let's be honest. Yeah, that was a concern. Um, but, you can't sue somebody for becoming pro life. And I had never signed any sort of confidentiality statement while working there. So they lost, and that's it.
Well, even then though, it would seem in most cases, and you can tell me I'm out of line here, friends, people who are your friends, you develop these strong relationships. Generally speaking, if it comes down to siding with a corporation or an organization or a friend, they would side with the friend. So, what do you think was such a strong pull that they decided to support Planned Parenthood, the organization, to come against you, Abby, the person, in court?
Yeah, I think money. I think they were concerned about losing their job. Um, they were higher level employees with Planned Parenthood, so I think that was certainly a concern. I mean, they didn't know that this would happen, but after they testified against me, they actually got fired. So, it might have been different if they would have been able to see ahead to that. But
Why were they
um,
fired?
I don't know.
Just because they
I
were
just
crappy
know that.
witnesses?
I guess so. Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
weird reason to be fired, but I'm glad they were. I'm not contesting it, but that's a weird reason to be fired.
No, 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 no. I know. I mean, I'm glad that they were fired too. But
The problem is, I mean,
yeah.
it just gets replaced. So let me ask you this: when you see, I've talked about this with my producer actually, who's not here right now, Fundip, who is liberal socially but incredibly pro-life. When you see the political football being played with the issue of abortion, and Planned Parenthood comes in the news, I mean, right? The defense is always from the left. No, 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 no. It's not about abortions. They provide health care to millions of women in this country who would otherwise never be able to afford it. The right is just, this is their anti-woman sexist crusade. What do you think when you hear that?
Planned Parenthood does not provide any services in regard to women's health care that low income women cannot get from any other federally qualified health center, rural public health center, hospital system, or Medicaid provider in their city. There is not one place where Planned Parenthood is located where there are not multiple other options for her to get health care if she's low income. And believe it or not, Planned Parenthood is not always that inexpensive. I mean, sometimes women are having to pay anywhere from $50 to $175 for, to get an annual exam with Planned Parenthood. Sometimes not, but sometimes they do.
How much would an
It's
abortion
all,
cost in comparison?
uh, it starts at about $400.
Okay. So even the abortions aren't necessarily inexpensive.
No,
What if
no,
someone
but
can't afford it?
we would give them tips on how to raise money for their abortion.
Okay. So it's not like an emergency room where you have to serve them anyway and then.
No, 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 no.
Okay.
No, you have to pay. In fact, if a woman came in,
They're not even
this
altruistic in their abortion providing. It
no,
still
no,
comes
no,
down to the
no,
dollars.
they're not charitable. Come on. Um, we would. This is like really heinous, but this is true. Um, when a woman would come in, we would take her payment based on her last cycle. So we would say, okay, we think based on your last cycle, you're 8 weeks and 5 days pregnant, right? Well, if we got them back to the room for their abortion and we did the ultrasound and we found that they were actually, let's say, 10 days, 10 weeks and 1 day pregnant, well, there's a price difference between 8 weeks and 10 weeks, $100 price difference. So somebody, usually the last person hired, would be tasked to go into the room while the woman's on the table and say, hey, you're a little bit further along than what we thought you were. So we're going to need to collect $100 extra before we can start your abortion procedure.
Holy
And then
crap.
we would be like, is it down in your purse? Do you want me to grab it for you? Or does your boyfriend have it out front? Or how do you want to take care of that?
I've been hustled in the streets of New York, more politely.
Yeah.
Literally, for a bag
Yeah.
of M&Ms. I'm not joking. That's a true story. It
Yeah.
cost $2 for a package. I ended up losing $20, but I had 5 bags of M&Ms, so I guess it ended up
There you go.
okay.
Yeah.
My cousins never let me forget it. That is unbelievable. So, okay. So it's all, again, Glengarry Glen Ross. It's all about the upsell, right? It's like, do you want the large popcorn? Pay an extra $100 for your abortion. Now, where do you line up politically for those listening? Were you to the left before, and did you shift your whole political ideology, or just in the life issue?
I was definitely as left could be when I worked at Planned Parenthood.
Right.
Um, it was funny when I first started getting calls about doing media interviews, and I got a call to go on Bill O'Reilly's show, and I called my
Uh oh.
parents who are very conservative, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to go on Fox News," and my mom was like, "You hate Fox News," and I was like, "Yeah, I think maybe I'm going to start watching it now." Um, but I mean, it wasn't a lot of things changed in my life, so I'm probably too liberal for most conservatives. I'm too conservative for most liberals. I follow a consistent life ethic. So I'm against the death penalty, against abortion, against assisted suicide. So
Okay.
that kind of has me fall in the middle.
Okay, that makes sense. So then you would have a better perspective as someone who is pro-life. I do say this though, since you're pro-life, would you agree with me? I say, listen, there are open-handed issues, there are closed-handed issues. I could vote for a Democrat in a local election because there are pro-life Democrats in a local election who don't, they don't have the control to increase the size of the federal government, and local municipalities have the right to do public schools. That's within their right.
Sure.
But I do think that if you are pro-life, if you believe that is a life, it precludes you from supporting the Democrat platform in a national election. Am I out of line?
No, I think you're absolutely right because I mean you're right. The state and local elections. I mean, I have I have pro life Democrat friends who
Sure.
I'd happily vote for. But when it comes to, a federal election, national election, I hate it. I wish it wasn't that way. I wish it wasn't such a party issue. But no, I mean, you've got the Democratic Party who's trying to take God out of their platform, who is trying to make abortion one of the top, issues in their platform. I mean, how can
It's
you?
women's health. Careful with your language now.
Right, right. I'm sorry. Women's health.
Don't make me be sexist and correct your self-loathing womanness.
But now we have a new push. Like in Washington D.C., there's these clinics called Carafem, and they are
Oh, I
proud
saw them. The
to
abortion
push
spa.
abortion. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, I know. They
So
were like
I mean, they're like
abortion.
abortion. Yeah, we do that. They're not
Yes.
trying to hide behind that
That
at
showed
all.
the disgusting broads drinking tea, talking about their
Yeah.
uteruses. Well, that's one thing that really bothers me, right? No uterus, no opinion. It's not about your uterus. It's about that life. It's about that baby. And this is just one thing where they go, well, Republicans want to tell you what you can do with your body. In no other instance, none, does a Republican Party platform. You might have some individuals, like Dick Morris in your feet or something like that, but no actual Republican platform has an interest in a lady's body in any other facet aside from when it has to do with that life. They don't want to have an opinion on whether you can buy contraception, whether you can shave your legs, whether you can work it. None of it. Shouldn't that
No.
show people that it's not really about taking your
Well, to
body?
be perfectly honest, the Republican Party is not really interested in what you're doing with your body. We're more interested in what you're doing with the body of the innocent person that's in your womb.
Exactly.
That's what we're interested in. You can do whatever you want to with your body. You can go pierce it up. You can get a bunch of tattoos. Do whatever you want. But
Does
you are
Planned Parenthood do
not allowed.
piercings?
Huh?
Does Planned Parenthood do piercings? Never mind. Don't answer that. We have to go to a break, but I'll bring you right
Okay.
back. Abby Johnson, abbyjohnson.com. Stay tuned. Back with Abby Johnson. I'm surprised she stayed after all of that nether region talk beforehand, but you have to talk about it when you're dealing with abortion. I mean, feminists are so ugly in their language
Yeah.
right now. And the truth is, you have people out there like Patricia Heaton. You have people who are genuinely strong women who support women in selling their personalities in putting on display their talents and their skills as opposed to their body. And there really is a tie-in between the abortion issue and what we sort of call third wave feminism. Have you noticed now, I guess sort of being more middle of the road, the pushback on this authoritarian feminism that you see from people at Planned Parenthood and Carafem, those kinds of campaigns?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think we're seeing a lot, kind of this idea of like new feminism. We're seeing a push in that, and that's really exciting actually. I mean, I have some friends that are pro-choice writers, and they have told me, Abby, if there's one thing that's going to flip this abortion movement on its head, it's going to be when women really embrace this idea of new feminism,
Mm-hmm.
that women don't have to choose between being a mom and having a career, right? We can have both, and
Right.
that we're not just breeders, that we have more to contribute to society than just our ability to have children, which is amazing. But we're not just
But
that,
no
right? We're
one
not
thinks of
just
you
mom.
that. I'll tell you something. Men don't think of you that way at all, particularly
I
the
know.
pro-life men who tend to respect women much more. Listen, a pro-life man doesn't get to check out and say, "Sorry, sweetheart, go have it sucked down a tube." They have to assume responsibility for that woman. So
Right.
I'm just saying it, not to derail the conversation, but I have tons of guy friends. Never once does a conversation go, "Hey, now that the women are wrong, they're going, aren't you just so glad that we have a bunch of walking uteruses waiting on us hand and foot to make sandwich?" It never comes up.
Right.
Um, so, and I think there's been actually, just like there's been more racial division in this country, there's been more gender, sexual division, I think, than ever, because there's a rejection of this from these supposed men's rights activists, which are kind of silly too, and this third wave feminism. And it sounds like you, maybe even some pro choice friends that you have, are somewhere in the middle where you can find reason.
Yeah, and they hate it. Honestly,
Yeah.
they hate that this idea of new feminism makes sense, this pro-life feminism. They hate that that makes sense to them because it completely goes against the traditional feminist model, right? That
Right.
there is no equality between the sexes, that women should be ahead of men, that it's not about equality, that it's this us versus them
But
sort
if
of
you're ahead of
struggle.
men, then
Right, right.
I want to ask you this now. Are you familiar with I'm sure Anne McElhinney and the Gosnell movie that they're doing?
Yes,
So
I
we
am.
had her on the show and she talked about the horror stories of Gosnell.
Yep.
Now, she contends that obviously he's terrible and they're doing a movie on it because it was a national story. But that it's not that far off from what's probably happening at some other abortion clinics across this country. Now, we're not talking about the sanitary conditions, but how far along the trail they actually do abortions, how it's just a chop shop, boom, in and out. Uh, how much in common do you think someone like Gosnell would share with the general American abortion doctor, maybe at Planned Parenthood?
I don't think a whole lot, honestly. I
Okay.
mean, yes, I think Gosnell was, I do think that he was a rare he was running a sort of rare kind of operation. There are others like him. We know that Douglas Carpin in Houston, who's no longer practicing as an abortionist, we know that he was doing the same sorts of things. We know that Pendergraph is doing those sorts of things. Carhart, it's these later term abortionists, those that are willing to do abortions into the third trimester. Because let's be honest, I mean, if you're willing to do abortions into the third trimester, you're probably kind of shaky on morality in the first place.
But not to
So,
people like Elizabeth Warren.
yeah, well, yeah. But I think a lot of people, even pro choicers I know, were just appalled by what they saw in the Gosnell trial. And, I've talked to people who were actually there, who are pro choice writers, who
Mm-hmm.
said, you know what, hearing about what took place inside of the clinic, that made me really question what's going on in, made me question the humanity of the unborn child, which is good.
Well,
So,
I think it's an interesting point there. So let me ask you. Elizabeth Warren, Jared, do you remember the name of the other? Gosh. The Texas Wendy Davis.
Wendy.
Sorry, they're almost interchangeable in my mind as just sort of the anti-baby cackling witches, and I mean witches. I don't mean the other word. I mean witches, cackling witches. Take it in context. Who believe in abortion pretty much on demand, free. I mean, you saw the tussle with Rand Paul and Elizabeth Warren.
Yes.
So you say a lot of your pro-choice writers or a lot of pro-choice people in the country were appalled at that, but you didn't see the outrage from HuffPo, from liberal
Right.
websites, and you don't see the outrage in third trimester abortion from Democrat politicians. So do you think that that's an issue where the elite are so much further along the trail that people, the general pro-choice person in this country, can be reached still effectively?
Yeah. So here's the thing. So anybody that's in leadership inside the pro-choice movement,
Right.
they cannot deviate from abortion on demand without apology, right? They cannot. You cannot start saying, well, okay, I think abortion's okay here until 24 weeks, or I believe abortion's okay if it's done this way, but not that way, right? Because then you pro-lifers can really easily start to pick apart your argument. So
Mm.
for them, for people who are really leading this charge, I mean, this was how it was for me at Planned Parenthood. I mean, you cannot deviate from the plan of legal abortion anywhere at all times without exception through all 9 months of pregnancy.
That's a good point. So you're saying even if those people in leadership may agree with those points that, hey, come on, you're talking about a third trimester abortion, they would, behind closed doors, you think, say, yeah, I agree, but they publicly cannot deviate from the game plan?
Yeah, they cannot. I mean, I remember when I worked at Planned Parenthood just thinking, ugh, okay, abortions after 24 weeks, that seems too far. These babies they can survive out of the womb. They're
Well,
viable,
you're saying after 4 weeks, so we're not even close to the third trimester at that point. How often are abortions performed after 4 weeks in Planned Parenthood? Not third trimester, but 4 or 5, 6 week abortions.
Well, so most abortions are performed before 12 weeks.
Right.
So there's in the first trimester. So the overwhelming majority of abortions are performed in the first trimester.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So I was
you
saying
know,
I meant first month. My apologies. Yeah, I was
no,
going
I got it.
month and sure.
So then, then there's a drop into second trimester abortions. And then there's an even more significant drop into third trimester abortions.
Sure.
So, you're looking at maybe, we think maybe about 20,000 babies are aborted in the third trimester in the United States every year.
That's still shocking.
I mean, it's a lot. Yeah, no, it's a
That's a
lot.
lot. I mean, that's a point where there's really no scientific debate as to whether it's potentially viable, as to whether it's an
Right.
individual, as to whether they have nerve endings. There's no scientific debate at that point.
No, no, no.
So here's my point. So, and I've always said this. I think that with abortion, sort of the Oprah soundbite is it's ultimately sacrifice at the altar of self. It's personal convenience, personal happiness is more important than this life. And I feel like, and I think you've reiterated that, I want to make sure I don't misrepresent you. There are people in the movement, we're at a point where it's not about women's rights. They do believe it's a life, especially as science comes in. They know it's a life. They don't care anyway. Is that unfair?
No, that's totally fair. I mean, I remember a pro-lifer asking me one time, when do you think life begins? And I remember my answer just being like, what doesn't matter? It doesn't matter when life begins because abortion is legal and I'm going to do everything I can to support legal abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy. That is not how I felt. That's not actually what I felt in my heart. That's not how I
Right.
felt in my mind. But I could not stray from that talking point.
Why did you go into this? Why did you feel passionately enough about this to do it?
I've had two abortions myself. So about 70% of people that work in the abortion industry have had abortions. So I think a lot of it is just kind of justifying your own past behavior or your own past mistakes. But I mean, honestly, I was just very naive. I was a college student. I didn't know anything about Planned Parenthood. And, when this woman is telling me how they serve these uninsured or underinsured women, and they're the only hope for these women if they need health care. I mean, it sounds like Planned Parenthood is this benefactor to the masses.
Sure.
And that was something that I was interested in helping with.
Okay. So your heart was in the right place. Maybe the mind took a little while to
Just,
catch up.
just very misguided.
That makes sense. And I think there are a lot of people out there like you. And like I said, I think there are people, the Elizabeth Warrens,
Sure.
I just forgot her name again. I just forgot her name. The Texas Wendy Davis. So those people are beyond reaching. You kind of have to make an example of them. But there are people like you out there who are maybe not quite far enough along the trail. And I do think Abby Johnson's book, Unplanned, is a great way to start. AbbyJohnson.org. Unplanned. Abby, thank you so much for being with us. Sorry, did I miss anything? Any closing words here that I missed?
No, I don't think so. Oh, well, just so you know, you're talking about conversion, and how we can convert minds. I actually run an organization that reaches out to abortion clinic workers and helps them come over to the pro-life side. And we've had 160 workers come to us. So there are a lot of people who are working in these clinics, who want to leave, who are looking for an excuse to leave, and they just need a hand. They just need a hand up so that they can get out. And that's what we've been able to provide. And 160 of those workers, six of them were abortionists that are now no longer performing abortion. So it can happen.
Okay. Well, thank you, Abby. But you must go peddle your anti-woman sexist propaganda elsewhere. AbbyJohnson.org. Yes. You must go. Thanks for being with us. Stay tuned to Louder with Crowder. More after we keep the lights on with these sponsors.